Greetings, fellow humans. My name is Alistair Lord and I am the Renaissance Yorkshireman. So today I've decided to start a new series of videos about anger, healing and trauma. And this is the perspective from a Western Buddhist. So why have I chosen to make a video on the topic of anger, trauma and healing? Well, the first reason is because I've had an anger management issue since I was a child, since as long as I can remember. So it's interesting to me because I've seen it in myself and I've made a certain amount of progress with my own anger management issue. There's plenty of work to be done, but I feel that I have something to say on this topic. The second reason is because I'm a Buddhist. I was not born a Buddhist. I was born in the United Kingdom. I went to Methodist church when I was young with my grandparents. But I discovered the teachings of the Buddha when I was 17 years old, and they really resonated with me and they helped me to make sense of the world. And Buddhism has a lot to say about anger. So if you do have an anger management issue, Buddhism is a great religion for you because it often talks about how to deal with strong emotions and anger when they come up. And the final reason, quite simply, is that it's a topic which interests me and I make videos about topics which interest me and I have a certain amount of knowledge about. Before we get into the meat of the video, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my influences. So firstly, I'm influenced by the Buddhist tradition. Now, the Buddhist tradition is more than 2,500 years old, and Buddhism talks a lot about the relationship between the heart, the mind, and the body. And I found some of the tools that I've got from Buddhist teachers to be very useful. Secondly, I'm influenced by Jungian psychology. So this kind of, the Jungian tradition in the West, it's kind of less than 150 years old. So really the kind of revolution in Western psychology began with Freud, more or less 150 years ago, give or take. And Jung was originally a student of Freud, but he broke with Freud later on because they disagreed about certain ideas. Anyway, I found many tools of Jungian psychology and shadow work to be extremely useful in my own practice for dealing with anger. One YouTuber who I found very useful, who talks a lot about shadow work, is a YouTuber by the name of Emerald Wilkins, and she calls herself Emerald at the Diamond Net. And finally, something else from the Western psychological tradition that in this case is less than 50 years old is internal family systems. And I came across internal family systems about 3 years ago, and I found many of their ideas and many of their techniques to be very useful in dealing with anger for myself. So let's talk about the definitions of anger. Now, I would say there are two types of anger. So the first one we can call petty anger, or in a more kind of Buddhist fashion, we might call it egoic anger. And we've all seen this from other people and we've all seen it in ourselves. So it's when something stupid happens. Someone's eaten your last biscuit. Who's had my last biscuit? I just wanted that with a cup of tea. You're driving in your car, someone cuts you up. Look at that dickhead, what's he doing? He's cutting me up. So this kind of petty anger, it's all about me, me, me. You've been inconvenienced by something else, you're angry about it. So this type of anger can be defined as me-centric. And it's about petty issues, things that are really of pretty much no consequence whatsoever. And there's two types of ways that this petty anger can manifest. One, it can be projected out. So you shout at other people, you lose your temper in public, you put someone down, and essentially there is no positive outcome of this. It's negative for you because you're going to feel bad in your body, and probably later when you reflect on your behavior, you'll feel bad. That person is inconvenienced. People who are watching it are inconvenienced. They don't want to be affected by your anger, but they are. So this kind of petty anger, it's all inconvenience for no gain. And the other way that you can express petty anger is by turning it inwards. So some kind of self-flagellation. Oh, I've been drinking too much. Oh, I smoked too much yesterday. Haven't got enough work done. I'm an idiot. Blah, blah, blah. So you can turn it inwards. And in Jungian terms, we might say that this is related to the inner critic. Although I think the inner critic and your inner anger issue are slightly different, but they are closely related. But basically, this kind of egoic petty anger, whether it's projected outwards or whether it's projected inwards, it serves no positive purpose. The second type of anger is sometimes referred to as righteous anger, but I'm going to refer to it as sacred anger. So as an example, if we think of Martin Luther King in the United States of America in the 1950s, starting the civil rights movement. Now, he didn't do this because he wasn't angry. Now, he was angry at a perceived injustice outside in the world, and he decided that he wanted to take action about that perceived injustice. So he did, and his sacred anger brought about a lot of positive change. So sacred anger gets things done and it can bring about positive change. So there's two main ways that this can manifest. So one is like the example I just gave you of Martin Luther King, where there is something large outside you. It may or may not affect you directly. In Martin Luther King's case, it affected him directly. But I remember at the end of, I can't remember now whether it was 2002 or 2003, and I remember going on an anti-Iraq war march. I had my daughter in her pram, she was a baby then, and I was not happy the way that Tony Blair got into bed with George W. Bush and launched the war in Iraq. Now, that didn't affect me directly, but it affected me indirectly in the form of, let's say, more taxation to pay for wars. So the two examples that I gave you, one of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, one of marching against the Iraq war, they're examples of trying to bring about change in the world that has come about because you were angry about something. And the second way we can manifest sacred anger, apart from issues that are outside ourselves, is to maintain healthy boundaries. So I'll give an example where this goes wrong. So people pleasers, they're not in touch with their sacred anger and they let other people walk over them because they don't have sufficient boundaries. Now, if you want to have a positive relationship with other people, be they family members or friends or, lovers, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, you need to know what your boundaries are and you need to be firm when the other person has transgressed your boundaries. And I would argue that this is a function, in many respects, of sacred anger done right. So next, I'd like to talk about certain strategies. Now that we understand that egoic anger and sacred anger are two distinctly different things, but I think in many cases there's a third type of anger, which is when egoic anger and sacred anger get mixed together. So what are strategies to deal with anger? Well, firstly, we want to reduce our egoic anger. It serves no purpose. And two modalities that I've used for dealing with reducing my egoic anger are mindfulness and loving kindness meditations. Now, I'm not going to go into those in this video here, but I will make a video about them later. So the second strategy we can do is untangling the egoic anger and the sacred anger. And I would say that people on the political right and people on the political left both often demonstrate this tangling of the egoic anger and the sacred anger, but they manifest it in distinctly different manners. Now, I don't want to go into this at this point. I just want to outline that untangling these two types of anger is very important. And the final strategy that I think we need for dealing with our anger, I'm going to call riding the horse of sacred anger. Because a horse is a very powerful creature. And if you know how to ride the horse, you can go from point A to point B much faster than you would do walking. Historically, cavalry would ride into battles on the back of a horse because it gave them an advantage in fighting. And if you're not in control of the horse will take you here and there and everywhere, and it will cause problems. So our righteous anger, our sacred anger, can be thought of like a horse. It can be extremely useful for all sorts of purposes, but we need to know how to ride it properly and not let it take us where it wants to go. But we're not trying to diminish our sacred anger, we're trying to harness it. And that was a brief outline of the three main strategies, what I perceive to be the three main strategies for dealing with anger. If you're interested in sustained personal change, I've launched a course this month about how to make sustained personal change in your life. You can go and have a look at my website, alistairlord.co.uk. There's information there about my course and also about my book, Post-Capitalism, An Alternative to the Great Reset. Thank you for giving me your time today. Remember, stay free and peace begins with you and me.